Hello there and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche. Major streets went wild with jubilation after Michel Djotodia stepped down as interim president of the Central African Republic in January. Now, without wasting time, the Transitional Council, led by Alexandra Ngwendet, went on to install Catherine Panza Samba as a replacement. Now, however, latest developments show that the storm in the heart of Africa is far from over. Now, same goes for Egypt, where former President Mohamed Morsi is on trial for charges ranging from terrorism to espionage. The military-backed government continued its crackdown on pro-Morsi supporters ahead of elections later this year. What are your thoughts on the situation in Egypt and the Central African Republic? Share your thought with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take this report, and Africa Today will be right back. Thanks for joining us.
A Catholic church in Bangui. The sound of the bell is the only reminder that this is a place of worship. Its premises have become a solace to many fleeing the brutal killings, looting and mass atrocities. Authorities at this church turned camp for the internally displaced tells us that over 23,000 people now seek refuge here. Well, this is just a small fraction of the total number of internally displaced persons scattered across the country. One thing they have here is security, but another thing that remains inadequate is food supply and other relief materials.
We
have been promised food supply at the end of the month. The conflict has made it extremely difficult for supplies to be transported from neighboring countries, but we have been told that cars carrying food supplies have been allowed to go through. Hopefully, those who are yet to get supplies will get it this time. 50-year-old Debu now sits idle in the camp. He tells us that he's a large-scale farmer who can no longer feed his family. Debu and other thousands of displaced civilians now rely on UNICEF volunteers like Bamoy Ofi and his team, working to bridge the gap of humanitarian assistance in the country. As volunteers, they now understand firsthand the consequence of the conflict on the population. Adapting to harsh living conditions appears not to be a challenge for the population in Central African Republic. For many of them, this is not the first time they will have to flee their homes, following many months of violence and atrocities carried out by Seleka and other armed groups in the country. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Bangui.
Right at the end of recent donors summit led by the African Union, officials said the total pledge fell short of the $409 million needed to finance the peacekeeping in the Central African Republic. Now, to discuss the trending issues on Africa Today, we have Professor Charles Dokubo of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, a research professor with a specialty in conflict resolution. Professor, it's good to have you join us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
and
you.
Let me say Happy New Year.
Oh, same to you. Same to you.
All right, and later on the show, we'll be linking up Femi Akonde, TVC News international correspondent in the Central African Republic. And TVC News Aya Haraz will also be joining us from Egypt in the second segment of the program. Now, let's start it this way. A country now deposed the president, rebels took over, stayed for a little time, and they stepped down. An interim government was appointed or selected, and after some time, the Transitional Council, and so on. Interim, and then the current interim government by Samba Panza is given the mandate to conduct elections, and so on. How would you assess the political trends in the Central African Republic?
If you look at the history of Central African Republic right from independence, it has been a catalogue of disaster. One coup after another, instability, and in a very poor resource country, landlocked, dependent on French aid and supplies from other neighbors, surrounded by countries that are involved in conflict, Chad, Sudan, and all that. All these have impacted on the country that has not gotten any stable institution. You have had leaders turning themselves into monarch and installing themselves as emperors in that country. But the recent one I think is the most difficult that we can even talk about. Rapid changes of government, and then an interim administration set up to conduct elections. As of now, the people of Central Africa, they've not spoken, and we don't know where they want. But one thing you must understand, that any government that emerges must take as its project the issue of social provisioning, poverty, poverty, poverty. And the fear of being dominated by a particular group has been at the center of this discourse.
But with this, because like your analysis say, since independence, the country has never found peace, has never really worked in harmony as a case. Will there ever be harmony in that country?
I think we shouldn't rule out the possibility that after going through all these difficulties, I think prudent minds and then people with good ideas will also emerge. The country will not be totally left like that. Let's see these elections, how they are conducted, and see how the support the international community, will give to them in terms of midwifing democratic institutions and all that. If that takes place, we cannot say that it is Uhuru yet, but I think it's a way towards Uhuru. I believe we'll have to give time to the process to stabilize and then consolidate.
All right. Now, with the trend of things, how would you assess the response from the African Union precisely?
The African Union also is an organization that has its own problems in the sense of it's also doesn't have that amount of resources, finance, and also lifting capabilities to intervene to maintain peace and security, despite very good security architecture. But we believe that with the assistance they've always gotten from international organizations like the UN, I believe that they will do what they can, in terms of the human support to that country. But we must also understand the role of France in all of this issue. Central Africa was a former French colony, and the French in the past, since they've headed the Department of Peacekeeping Operations in the UN, they've always taken a very serious stance, because I think some of them believe that without Africa, French does not have any history. So they will always like to play a part. And also they see it as a counterweight to Nigeria. Nigeria is predominant in the continent and trying to do things that Nigeria could have done on its own, but they will intervene. And because they are also in charge of peacekeeping operation at the UN, it's difficult for Nigeria to play the role that it has been destined to play. Because they will decide, they will write the report, they are the pen holders in the UN Security Council, they will write to the Secretary General telling them that the inadequate capacity of African states and their troop deployment will not enhance any peacekeeping in the continent. And then they will take over the peacekeeping. Immediately, all what was denied the African countries will begin to the French. The United States will put in something, the EU will put in something, and then it becomes a good, while Africa could have done it on the cheap.
All right. But in that case, let me ask this question. The point there is, African Union, the chairperson of African Union Commission, Dlamini Zuma at the time, was talking about the fact that Africa has to deviate from dependence, or 100% dependent on the West and external agencies and so on. But with the incapability of handling these issues, where if it doesn't have its own resources and capability and capacity to handle its own issues, it means they will always remain dependent on the West.
I doubt so. There is the last Darfur crisis, we've seen the African Union and the new concept of peacekeeping, hybrid in the sense that the UN had to work in concert with Africa to do something, because the UN on its own cannot do everything in the continent. So they still need to have the African content of that peacekeeping operation. So we must try definitely to develop all the capacities that we need in this continent, but it cannot be overnight. The AU is just how many years old? And then we should not draw inference from the fact that the OAU has been here a long time. So it's a continuation of the... No, it's a new...
But is it not supposed to be a continuation?
No, it's not. It's a totally new organization. We have to see it from that perspective. And also know that it's still, coming up, and it needs some of these teething problems that it's going to be sorted out sometime. But if you try to judge it as the continuation of the AU, you'll make mistakes in the assessment of it, because any organization is as good as the members that make it up. And the AU is one of those things. It's a new organization. But a departure from the African Union, from the Organization of African Unity. You say that the security architecture is one that has been designed in such a way to deal with the emerging security environment of the 21st century, that you have the capacity to intervene, to maintain peace, to enforce peace.
Okay.
And also a lot of strong institutions that have been built, around this concept of peace and security in Africa. But it will take time for it to have all that is required to develop the various standing brigades in the various parts of the continent, so that there could be
response
to crisis and all that. These are all things that have been doing, although it has been supported by other countries. Because I also believe that it will be better for Africa to maintain its own way of solving African solution to African problems.
Exactly.
So as a result, they are trying to assist the institution building the control room in Addis Ababa by the German government and all that. The AU hall was built by the Chinese and all that. So you can see that what they are doing is to give Africa the required capacity and enhancement to perform duties that the organization has been set to do.
All right. That's well. That sounds encouraging anyway. But let's see how they play out. Now let's look at Catherine Samba Panza, the new interim president of the Central African Republic. She's a woman. So many persons are going to feel, well, at this critical time of the life of Central African Republic, having a woman interim president, can she handle this? Can she handle that? But what's your assessment?
I think that if you have the positive view that there's sexual inferiority on women in terms of handling crisis situation, I'll beg to differ with you.
I certainly don't have that. I feel okay.
I believe that she will try all the best that she can to make sure that our country comes back to what is supposed to be a stable country. It will be a difficult task for anybody. And for some, it's a poison chalice for you to have that sort of position. But she has gone into it, and I believe that if she's given the chance to carry out this transition and also electionary provisions and all that, I think I'm not sure she's there to rule. She's just trying to midwife a situation. As a woman, midwifing is even better for women to handle than for men. So I think she's going to handle it in such a way that lets the organization of the AU give her the necessary support and other international organizations in the world. I think she'll succeed if she's given all these things, although it's a very difficult task, I must say.
It's okay. We certainly look forward to that, and we hope something good will come out from the Central African Republic. We'll be trying to link up with our correspondent Femi Akonde at the Central African Republic, but we have line issues right now. But let's go on a quick break, and when we return, Africa Today, we'll be looking at the political climate in Egypt. Stay with us. All right, thanks for staying with us on Africa Today. Egypt's deposed Islamist president, Mohamed Morsi, has been in and out of court on trial of the past months. He faces 4 separate court proceedings on a number of charges, with some of them carrying the death penalty. Now, Egypt is another very peculiar situation on the continent. Would you say that Egypt has lost the vision of the revolution?
I don't know what that revolution stands for.
Okay.
Because, it has different interpretation. People say it's democracy. People say it's people's power. And all sorts of, or an Arab or a spring that did not even occur. As far as Egypt is concerned, it's a peculiar situation. The Egyptians have never known democracy for over 400 years.
That's true.
It was an attempt, And also the participants in the system were not really Democrats at heart. They had their own peculiar and personal interest in the lines they want to pursue. So I doubt if they've lost their way. It's always been a place where a strong man has held sway in that country. Changing it will not be easy.
Okay.
That's the way they know best.
All right.
And then we must also understand that, like I always say, democracy will not solve all issues. It will not solve it. It's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
Because it determines who gets what, when, and at what cost. Who will be in charge of my own future? It's a lot of things. And if you accept what they did, the Islamic Brotherhood, in terms of majoritarian rule and trying to accept that because they won elections with majority, they could do whatever. There's other side of democracy, listening to the opposition, listening to what they demanded also.
Right.
So these are the issues that is confronting a country that is not used
to the system,
to the
democratic system.
Yes,
All right, we'll
yes.
come back to this. Now, joining us from Egypt is TVC News North Africa correspondent Aya Haraz. Aya, it's good to have you join us on Africa Today. Now, let me say, you've been closely following the political situation in Egypt. What is the latest on the Morsi trial now?
Well, the last Morsi trial that took place was on Saturday this week, and we saw that the trial was adjourned, and we'd had expected that, as most trials had happened with. Now, he was charged in that trial, Mohamed Morsi, and along with 14 other defendants, for inciting his supporters to kill 10 protesters. Now, these charges can actually ultimately lead for him, or carries initially, the death penalty. So, and what we also saw that day, surprisingly, on Saturday, that despite the heavy security that was present around the court and in front of the trial, anti-Morsi supporters were there in quite a few numbers, and they attacked the lawyers that represented Mohamed Morsi, especially Salim Alawa. And now Salim Alawa was actually recently chosen by last week by Mohamed Morsi to represent him, and that was a definitive move by Mohamed Morsi, because he had constantly in each trial demanded that the trial was legitimate, the court was legitimate, and so were the judges, and that he was the legitimate present. So for him to actually choose a lawyer to represent him in a case shows that he has at least, or finally, in a way, acknowledged the case itself, which means he acknowledges the trial. And we'll have to see how that goes ahead, and how his team of lawyers will be able to defend him and try and prove that he's innocent, and how the court itself will publicly be able to prove that Mohamed Morsi, along with the 14 other defendants, are guilty. But last week, the week before that, we saw another trial taking place where he was charged with collaborating with foreign terrorist groups to try and break out of prison. And now, every single time that Morsi does appear in court, and it does, and it's aired on state TV, it does invigorate most of his supporters in Egypt, and we see protests on that day happening. But surprisingly, on Saturday, it did seem to be a very quiet day in terms of his supporters.
All right. Now, are there still protests on the streets for and against Morsi, as the case may be?
Well, what we're seeing on the street, surprisingly now, the Anti-Coup Alliance, which is mostly a very Muslim Brotherhood-supported group, had announced right before the 25th January revolution anniversary that they were going to carry out protests every single day from the 25th of January until 11th of February. They were trying to mimic the 18-day revolution that happened 3 years ago, and in a sense, to prove to the public that they're still going on quite strong. But as we saw, and as most people had expected, they couldn't carry out these protests on a daily basis, which just showed how weak the structure of the Muslim Brotherhood was, and how it's lost quite some of its supporters. Now, obviously, this is very understood, especially because since the Muslim Brotherhood was seen and banned and seen as and labelled as a terrorist group, and that was also due to the fact that the media and the government had constantly held them responsible as well for the past violent attacks that's been happening in Egypt. Even though they have denounced the violence and denounced any attack that they were seen to be responsible of. But despite all of that, there were thousands of them arrested. Now, a private independent newspaper in Egypt actually mentioned that 20,000 supporters and Muslim Brotherhood members have been arrested since Morsi's ouster. They've also been threatened. Many of them are facing trials from the Muslim Brotherhood, and their assets have been frozen. And even the Forensic Authority recently has announced that at least thousands have been killed who are mostly Muslim Brotherhood supporters only during August and September, just in Cairo alone. So all of that has obviously greatly impacted the organization itself and the structure, and has, in a sense, caused it to fall apart.
All right, Aya, let me cut you and ask you this question now. Over a month ago, reporters from the international TV network Al Jazeera were arrested on different on different charges, as the case may be. What's the latest situation on the journalists that were arrested now?
Well, the situation has developed a bit. We saw after the arrest, especially of the four, now three actually, Al Jazeera English reporters. Recently, the Cairo court has decided to put on trial 20 of the Al Jazeera journalists, but one of them recently has just been acquitted and seen that he was innocent of all the charges that was held against him after being detained for over 6 months in prison. However, his release date hasn't been actually announced yet, and Al Jazeera has claimed that they're still waiting for the Cairo court to release him. But today, interestingly, we saw a new video come out, and it was a video that showed footage of Mohammed Fahmy, the Cairo bureau chief of Al Jazeera English, and the correspondent Peter Greste, both as they were being interrogated in the hotel room just right before they were being arrested by the security forces. And the channel that aired that video is called Tahrir Channel. It's a private Egyptian channel, and they played a dramatic soundtrack as they aired the video. And the video showed essentially just the room itself and in the Marriott, footage of the laptops that were being used, the camera equipment, and the live backpack. And then they were interrogating them, and it was really interesting that the security forces had tried their best to try and retrieve from Mohammed Fahmy and Peter Greste names of those who worked in the Cairo bureau.
All right, Aya. All right, Aya, thank you very much. That's the much time can permit us for now on the program. Thank you very much, Aya Haraz, for joining us on Africa Today from Egypt. That's our correspondent there. Okay, now let's narrow it down this way. People are tipping General or Field Marshal Al-Sisi to run for presidency. If he ends up running for presidency and he becomes a president, would it be seen as a democracy after that time? Because
the fact is that he's going to step down as a military personnel before he contests election.
Okay.
Men that have become military leaders before, there are no laws banning them from contesting election.
Right.
Other developed democracies also they do that. President Eisenhower, all the Egyptian prime ministers or president have been military men before.
Okay.
So definitely it doesn't count against them. The fact that he was the person who intervened. And then as far as he was concerned, and the military was in Egypt is concerned, is that it was not that they were taking over power. They were trying to stabilize an already exploding situation, to pacify it in such a way that gradual return to democracy will come. But in Egypt, especially in Egypt, the secular citizens have never won elections. It's only through the back of military men that they will just come and assume position. So even if he comes up or not, there must be the need of the polity to bring in the Islamic Brotherhood into politics. Okay. They must bring them back. If not, if elections were conducted and these people have been proscribed and they could not participate, I think the crisis will still continue, in spite of whoever is in charge.
All right, but some analysts will say that tipping General Field Marshal Al-Sisi to run for president now seems to be a script that has been acted all the while. The
fact is that Egypt is used to strong men, Mubarak, Sadat, and their first revolutionary leader Nasser and all that. These are strong men that have led the country for a very long time. And in that period also, they've also experienced a period of relative peace, as far as they were concerned. So I think it is not, I think it's run into form in the sense that they have just emerged a new strong man, Field Marshal, and then he's going to be in charge of the country. I believe, most Egyptians believe that because of what they are going through at the present time, the instability, uncertainty, and the insecurity in the country, that they need somebody that is strong enough who can control, who can have confidence in the military.
All right, but finally, let me ask you, but are we looking at another dictator in Al-Sisi?
I doubt if it's going to be a dictatorship.
Okay.
Sometimes, we talk about dictatorships. What if they're not intervening in Egypt? What would have happened? I've heard people say that they should allow the Islamic Brotherhood to run the cause of and destroy the whole country and all that.
Okay.
We must also know, we should not even condemn this thing, in totality.
Okay.
a country that is so important, pivotal to Africa, is being destabilized by factions. Why can't we see reason in the sense that there must be a process of pacification and stabilization?
All right, Professor Charles Dokubo, thank you very much for coming on the program today.
Nice
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we also thank Aya Haraz, our correspondent, North Africa correspondent there. And we couldn't link up with Femi Akonde, our international correspondent at the Central African Republic. Now, certainly, people have been looking at the similarity between the Central African Republic and Egypt. And certainly analysts are still watching, and all Africans are still watching. Citizens of the Central African Republic and even Egyptians are looking forward to time where there can be peace and all of them will return back to their normal duties as a democratic government and as democrats, as the case may be. That's how we wrap up the show today. Thank you very much for watching. You can send your text, reach us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. And certainly you can watch previous episodes on YouTube.com/TVC Africa Today. And until the next one, I am Mike Okwoche. And don't forget, this is Africa. Bye for now.